That's another thing that I'll say, right? Our enemies always underestimate our resolve because they have where to run to, we don't. So we will always fight to the end because we have no other choice.
Right.
And I think, by the way, that's something that a lot of our friends also don't fully understand, that there are other, perhaps not as amazing solutions or alternatives, but the truth is, again, in 48 and 67, when Arabs chose to run, had to run, however you want to look at what happened there, they had where to go to. We didn't. And that really is, I think, why we won those wars. And going back, to really is, I think, why we won those wars.
What does it take to fight a 1,000-day war and still believe in the future? In this conversation, Jeremy Saltan, reservist platoon commander, Knesset insider, and the man once called the Israeli Nate Silver, opens up about 620 days of reserve duty, the difference between strategy and tactics, how the media really shapes elections, the lessons of October 7th, and why Israel fights with no place to run. It's a rare, unfiltered deep dive you won't hear on mainstream TV. If this conversation matters to you, please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
Great. Again, Jeremy. I assume you've been pretty busy in the interim. This is like a 1,000-day war. I mean, it's, and on how many fronts are we? Like, if you count all the nations that, according to J.D. Vance, they're against us, it's like we're on like 180 fronts. So,
well, I think we're still calling it the Seven-Front War.
The Seven-Front War, right?
But obviously there are additional fronts that are going on. I'll say, first of all, it's great to be back with you, Neil.
Thanks.
It's really nice to see you again in person and to speak with the audience. Yeah, 1,000-day war, right? I'm looking at the fact that I just checked it the other day. I've done 620 days in this war.
Of reserve duty.
Yeah.
Of Miloim.
So I've done 62% as a reservist, And that's crazy because I know people who've done more.
Right.
Of course, the majority of people, thank God, have done less. But the fact is, when I'm talking to someone who's like, oh, I feel bad, I've only done 300 days, right? And I'm kind of like, no one asked you to do an almost additional year of Army service. But that's just the situation we found ourselves in this 1,000-day war, which is 1,000 days and counting.
Right, and counting, right. And probably escalating as we speak. Although, I don't know if you're allowed to comment on that. Current events are unfolding on a day-to-day basis. So you've been promoted. You're now a platoon commander, which is over 100 people. And that's a whole different level of responsibility. Do you feel more strengthened or more nervous?
I don't feel strengthened or nervous.
Yeah.
I do feel a sense of responsibility. The major thing that any commander has, even when you're just in charge of 3 or 4 or 5 people, is the fact that you know that really the person's life is in your hand.
Right.
And the way that an army works, it's not unique to the Israeli military, is that if you're in a squad, right, so you want the squad leader to be the smartest guy, right, or at least the best decision maker. And when you go up to the machlaka, and as you go up through the ranks, you want the best decision maker in that unit to be in that position. And really the focus that I've had as a platoon commander is to try to be the best decision maker in the platoon. And that doesn't mean that I need to have all the answers. It means that I have to know who to ask the right questions. And that could be below me, that could be above me, in terms of getting the information that I might need in order to make that decision, to go out and pursue it, and to make sure that I get that, right? And in the end of the day, really the responsibility when you know you're in charge of people's lives, and especially at that level, when you're not dealing with tactics anymore, you're dealing with the question of, are we even going to go out and do this mission or not go out and do this mission?
Mm-hmm.
What are the logistics we're going to use for that mission? What we're going to decide in terms of, what each person's task is going to be within that mission. That's a lot of responsibility. So again, when I look at really the promotion, I look at both the responsibility of being in charge of people's lives
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that, again, it's life or death decisions, but also on the more small decision making, understand that the way that you decide to place your chess pieces on the board and the way that you choose to start to play them has a lot of significance in terms of the big picture.
Mm-hmm. Is there, by the way, if you want, if your monitor is okay, you could feel free to go if you want, or you can stay also. It's useful to stay.
Do you need me to monitor?
What? No, if you think it's on its own, then that's okay. Yeah, but feel free to stay if you want. Okay. So what kind of groups are you in control of? Like, these are combatants?
Well, again, I don't want to get.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I won't. It won't be too specific. Okay. Let's move on and talk about. You have a Knesset blog.
Yes,
it's called
of course.
Knesset Jeremy.
Indeed.
And how is that going? And what's your focus there?
Well, Knesset Jeremy is a project that I started back in 2010. So we're over 16 years.
Wow.
I started by really putting the information of what was going on in Knesset each day of the millennium into English and up onto the internet. And as sort of a side thing, I covered all the polls to sort of give everyone the pulse of why people are maybe saying the things they're doing and who should maybe be taken more seriously and less so in terms of course, who's above or below wherever the threshold was. Of course, at that time, the threshold was much lower. And
could you explain what you mean by that?
yes, of course. For those who are not aware of the way Israeli politics works, in essence, we don't vote for people, we vote for parties. And what happens is the parties end up entering Knesset based on a proportional system, meaning to simplify things, right? If I get 10% of the vote, I will get 12 seats, right? Because you have 120 seats.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that, but on a most simplified idea that is what the outcome is.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this concept of an electoral threshold, meaning you might get enough to get a seat, but
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that you are going to end up being represented within Knesset, which again is our legislative branch, our parliament. So right now, today's threshold is 3.25%.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes up to roughly just under 4 seats in terms of the representation.
Mm-hmm.
When I'd started the blog, the threshold was 2%, which was within the threshold of the 2 seats. So that started more as a side thing that I was doing as part of the tracking. And as time went on, I ended up, in essence, focusing so that the majority of the time I would be focused on the polls, and I really became the primary poll tracker in terms of the English language in the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And I also started doing some of my own polls. And then I also started coming up with, I like algorithms, all this, statistic probability stuff. I came up with a probability model in terms of trying to take, and this is another thing that's unique to Israel, a 5-day window in which you're not allowed to publish polls, meaning the last polls that Israelis know before they go to an election is 5 days before the election.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea was to create a prediction model that could project the trends and trajectory and sort of come up with an idea of where the final results are going to be, and ended up having some pretty good success doing these models in the 2013 election, 2015 election, then later on as well. I was even noted by a few people, both in Israel and in American publications, as the Israeli Nate Silver, as being able to be more predictable than the polling companies were using my algorithm.
Wow.
But I'll say again, that's always fun to use an algorithm as opposed to actual polls, to try to create as much as you can through the science of public opinion, which is very difficult to predict,
Yeah.
what people are going to do, as opposed to sampling the people and asking what their opinion is. Because it's important to remember those are two separate things. Of course, they're interconnected. And of course, if you're going into the bigger arena of politics, that became very worthwhile, of course, for politicians who wanted, in terms of strategy, to understand also better, perhaps many times, what are the right questions to ask, instead of coming up with the questions or the wording of the questions, but also sort of understanding, as someone as I am, working in the Knesset for so many years, how the small parts really fit into the big picture. I find a majority of people, they're either amazing strategists, but they're terrible tacticians, or the opposite.
You have to explain for myself and for our audience, because
Yes.
people often these days make that distinction between tactical and strategic. And if you can lay that out for us a little.
Sure. I mean, the easiest way to do it, right, is from a, let's say, from a military standpoint, right? There is a hill that I want to go ahead and conquer. Am I going to go from the left? Am I going to go from the right? Right? You can go ahead and talk about the strategic decision you make of how it is that you're going to accomplish that. Or it can deal with the tactics of how, once you've made a decision, right, we're going to go from the left, how it is that you're going to go about that in terms of the really, it's really grunt work, right? But the very small decision making of while you're going left, are you going to, when you get to this point, are you going to go through the stream? Are you going to go around the stream? If you're going to go, in each one, right, then it breaks down to more smaller and smaller decisions. So great tacticians are very good at, you give them a situation, you throw them in the mud, if you will, and they're able to go ahead and come up with the best decisions in terms of how to get through to the other side. But if in essence the strategy of going to the left was the wrong decision, it doesn't matter how good of a tactician they are, they're going to lose that battle most likely because the wrong strategy was chosen. And a lot of times you have, by the way, both in the military and in civilian life, strategists who like to go down to the tactics. Sometimes they're good at it, but more often than that, they're not. There's a reason why you have in chain of command. You have the
Right.
general, you have the colonel, you have the major, you have the captain. Each person has his own specific role. And if you're looking in politics, it's the same way, right? You're going to have the campaign manager, you're going to have the strategist. They're different positions. Yeah, you might have campaigns where they're the same thing, but you have to understand they're different functions. The spokesman is different than the person who's in charge of field operations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Each person has their own task. So if we're going back to, again, the differences between tactics and strategy, strategy is the macro, it's the big game, and tactics is really the micro, the small game. And like I said, I think one of the things that is unique about myself is that I've been able to be pretty good. I'll at least say above average in terms of both of them. And that is, particularly in politics, very rare, because usually especially in politics, people are usually only good in one of those two things. And there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of it is structural. But in the end of the day, it's not a system that sort of brings you up in the American, school of thought of learn a little bit of everything, excel in a little bit of everything, be well-rounded, your old liberal arts,
Right.
type of education. When you come to politics, everyone comes in with a specialty, right? You have many people, of course, who come in where their main specialty is law. So they're going to think as a lawyer. I took a different path. My first degree was in political science, international relations. My second degree was in international security and diplomacy from the Hebrew University. And as someone who understands law very much and took plenty of law classes, and I was able to write law a lot better than the people who their main focus was law, who were lawyers who went out practicing law. Because in law, they teach you the box, and then you try to manipulate. Maybe that's a little bit of a harsh word. That's
right.
pretty much what lawyers do,
Yep.
if we're going to be frank, within that box. And if you're able to think outside of it, whatever it is, but it's connected to the box, there's merit there. When you're drafting legislation, you have to create the box. That's a different tool. That's a certain skill set. And I'm saying this as someone who's, again, I've came and I've talked to, students and faculty of law, and I've given what I think are, pretty interesting talks there or lectures. And in the end, the tool set that they're being given is very different than the tool set you need in order to be successful when it comes to legislating, because yeah, there's the political aspect. Yeah, there's the legislative aspect. But there are additional aspects that are involved. And during my many years working specifically in the committee work, but also in both drafting, but also helping dealing with all of the changes that you make within the committee, when it comes to legislation where you have to coordinate with different government ministries, and you have to be able to see what you can do in order to come to agreements. Right, you have to also be a little bit of a mediator, right?
A lot of a mediator, I would say.
So again, I never came up with an exact puzzle in which I could tell you there's X percentage to this aspect and Y percentage to the next X aspect. But when you're looking at the actual job of Knesset, when you're looking at the actual job, whether it's legislation, whether it's supervision, and again, supervision over the government, it's a very important part. It doesn't get a lot of play maybe in terms of the media. It's not as yellow, it's not as interesting, but it's a very, very important part of our democracy, that aspect of the parliamentary work. And, many times you'll have people who, they're career government people, right? And they might be great executives. And then we see them get into politics and they struggle with these, aspects because they don't have the full picture. Many times, again, you'll see lawyers who are brilliant lawyers. They'll come into Knesset. There's one, that I'm thinking of specifically, who's not passed one piece of legislation.
Wow.
Might be a very, very successful lawyer outside, but there are other things you need in order to be a good parliamentarian, and I would argue also perhaps even a good politician, right? So you need to be able, and I'll say also you have these people who they're political activists all their lives. They live and breathe politics, and you'd think, okay, the wheeling and the dealing they know, that's great. They get in, they have no content, they have no plans,
Wow, they just know the tactics.
So again, going back to that idea, you want to ideally have people who have tactics and strategy together. Generally, when you look for people who have both of them, you're looking towards people who are party leaders, right? Or if not the party leaders, because there's an additional aspect you need, right, as party leader, and that's charisma. Charisma helps you win the votes, right? There's the aspect of going out to get the votes, and then there's that aspect of then actually governing and actually going out and doing the actual work. So charisma is a huge thing that, of course, we see with the party leaders, but they're generally people who are able to do both. And other people who are able to do both are generally people who are more veterans of the system. Meaning, I don't think it's this natural thing that you come in where you're great at both. I think each person has a certain side that they sort of gravitate to. And with enough experience within the system, you can adapt and can learn and can evolve and then learn to do both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the same thing, you know, for instance, in the Army, right? When I did my regular service, I had a certain level of
3 years?
understanding. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I did a 3-year service. I had a certain level of understanding. But when you actually go and, right, you're learning international security in Hebrew U, and you're having visiting professors from, you know, the top minds on the planet, frankly, and you're learning from people who, in their former positions, obviously worked within the intelligence apparatus or top positions within the IDF or the foreign ministry. Because again, diplomacy, you know, it comes hand in hand with international security. So you go ahead and you suddenly open your mind to other models and things that might not be implemented at the moment within the Israeli system, but also open your mind to possibilities you didn't know exist, right? It's sort of, you know, as a father, it's always fun for me when I see one of my children discovering something, right? It could be discovering to you know, ride a bike, but it could also be discovering a book series that they like, right? Or, you know, something that I might, you know, particularly like if, you know, they suddenly, you know, discover a new sefer within Tanakh, you know, within the Nevi'im that suddenly they connect to or something like that. So I'm saying for myself, you know, you're able to do this also as an adult. If you believe in continuing education, if you believe that there's no person who's achieved perfection, there's no one who has really mastered everything, that you understand, you're humble enough that you still have what to learn, that you're able to go ahead and continue doing so. Many times I watch interviews of people who I disagree with, so I can understand where they're coming from their perspective, and that helps me prepare for myself. And it also allows me to challenge my own opinions, because that's an important thing to do today. And I think especially after October 7th, a lot of people have challenged their opinions or changed their opinions, or at least are now open to the idea that perhaps what they thought beforehand is no longer something that necessarily makes sense, at least in full today.
Yeah, it seems like pretty much everybody changed their ideas on October 7th. They became either stronger in the direction they were already following, or in many cases completely, you were speaking about Einat Wilf, completely reversed her direction. I don't know if that was the catalyst, but it certainly happened dramatically after that as well. So a couple of questions. Like in terms of, I think it makes me to think of the weather when you're doing poll prediction, right? So if they, you know, like
it's going to be windy.
It's going to be windy. Windy. That's exactly, exactly. So, but if they can do weather, which has like, you know, hundreds of millions of factors, then you should be able to do an amazing job of, you know, of prediction with politics as well.
You know, so I'll just jump in there for a minute.
Yeah.
I've always loved meteorology.
Oh, really?
My son also, he loves, you know, the different cloud formations. I think there is a lot of, you know, if you have to try to find one science, I think meteorology is great, also because of the margin of error, right? The margin of error in meteorology is something, and you know, it's right.
Close to infinite.
It's not that it's close to infinite, but it's something you always have to take into account. And I think really when you're looking at the sciences, really I know it sounds a little bit odd, but one of the things that really prepared me for politics was the fact within my bagrut, right, within my high school major. That's something that we do here in Israel, as you know.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, you already major in high school. So as part of my my major, which which was geography. One of the 5 units was meteorology, and I really feel that meteorology and the weather helped me with what I would end up doing later on.
Absolutely, because if anybody who dares to be a meteorologist is like,
You have to have guts.
you have to have guts.
You have to have big kahunas to be able to choose to immerse yourself in that, because right. My wife, she's an actuary. She's in terms of the hard sciences.
That's pretty much right along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I feel also. My kids are so balanced, right? Having both sides of that, but I really feel right. She's a hard science person. Hard science people, they hate meteorology, right? You'll talk to a lot of scientists. They'll be like, that's not science. Like, what's happening there? So much to the point that notice, right, in the education ministry, at least back in the time when I was doing my bagriyot at the turn of the millennia, that was part of the geography, right? It wasn't part of a science degree or physics or what. Like, they put it specifically as a science unit within the geography.
Yeah. Wait, you don't think?
Yeah.
I'm surprised that she doesn't consider it to be scientific.
No, I didn't say that she specifically. I said there are a lot of scientists, and then I mentioned that she as an actuary is definitely from the school of hard sciences. When you're doing math at that level, right, of actuarial level. A member of the actuarial society,
probably the international
and all of those,
actuarial
right.
society, yeah.
She's a member of all these things.
Yeah.
Like when you're so
let's
much
say what an
on the
actuary,
exact number, right?
Yeah.
And think of it also, right? Like the insurance company who's paying for a consulting company or whatever they're doing, they need to know the exact number in terms of profit to insure you so that they don't lose money and they don't go bankrupt, right? There's a certain amount of investment there, whereas in the weather, everyone wants to know what the weather is. People might also be invested, right? I might say, okay, I want to do an open chuppah, right? I need to make sure that it doesn't rain, right? You might be invested also in the weather, but it's not at the level as other aspects of the fact that you'll lose your job because you were a bad meteorologist.
Well, probably though, like for grain growers and stuff like that, I don't know, pork belly futures depend on the soybean futures, which depend on the weather.
Yeah, again, in the global economy, everything, of course, depends on everything. But I'm saying, if you're going to look at the margin of error of a meteorologist versus the margin of error of an actuary, or a biologist, or a chemist, or a physicist, or a rocket scientist, right? Like or a brain surgeon, like you're just looking at a different level. So when you're dealing with politics, there's such a high level in terms of the margin of error. And it's not just in polling, right? We look at polling because that's a thing that we all like to look at because the horse race is always interesting. What I've proven, though, in my prediction model is that many times it doesn't really matter, right? Like the guy who's ahead right now, he's most likely not going to be the guy who's ahead at the end of the day. But the media will make it seem like he is. Right. Because they're also invested in it. And again, there's a whole system, and there's always, of course, private interests, and there's a lot of things that go into politics. Because in the end, when you realize the foundation of the system where all of us are paying a percentage, a high percentage, some of us, right, in taxes to this place, and that place decides how to distribute and to prioritize what happens with that money, and also what are the governing rules that we are going to go about in terms of our society. So yeah, anyone who's everyone is going to want to have influence on that. You're going to have people who want to partake in that, but more often than not, you're going to have people who want to be a part of the system in a place where they can influence and not necessarily be seen. So you have a lot of those powers that be.
Yeah. So I heard an interview with, or I think it's his podcast, Gadi Taub, and he was saying that the media are mostly controlled by what's left of the left wing, and that so inevitably they're going to try to prejudice people which is a curious thing. Like if somebody's winning, does that encourage people to go on their side?
It really depends also, right? There's a very high level of psychology that's involved, right?
Right.
I think Netanyahu won the 2015 election because he was losing in the polls.
Wow.
If he was winning in the polls, I think Herzog wins that election. So it really depends on the framework. It depends on narrative. Narrative is a huge, huge aspect. And there are smaller aspects. Many of them are structural. Many of them are subconscious. But in the end, really in the end of the day, I think that as much as the media thinks they play a factor, they don't play as much a factor, right? Okay?
Right.
Because you can take this interview, for example, right? This
Yeah.
is an interview that I'd never do, right? I do a lot of TV interviews. I would never do this type of interview. This is a podcast type interview, right? This is a in-depth. This is a dive-in. This is something that's not this type of deep dive you don't do within mainstream media. But if you are looking at today, right, with channel 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, of course, adding itself into the mix, I think you have a supermarket of ideas where people have a preconceived notion of what they want to see and what they want to hear, and then they sort of allow the narrative that they want to enter their brain, really just go in through that, and they trust that channel to provide it for them, meaning the facts, the content, the priorities, what really matters. In essence, they make many times a decision in terms of what channel they want, and then they sort of give over all of those big issues. They sort of turn them into small issues by handing it over, sort of privatizing it, right? Saying, you make those decisions for me. And of course, if there's a red flag or something that's big, so they'll maybe reconsider if they want that station or take that specific thing. But as a main fact, they'll go ahead and accept those facts and content and stuff that's brought in as true, where many times it's an opinion and not fact. Many times it's selective.
Always. Always.
Right? They'll give you part of the story, not the whole story. But what really happens most of the time is to choose to emphasis on something, right? You can choose to emphasize if someone goes down in the polls by a seat or two. You can say that's a bump. You can say that's a collapse. It's a disaster. It's a person on the verge of the threshold, right? And the same way also, a person can raise themselves a seat or two seats, suddenly find themselves from under the threshold of 3 seats to suddenly 4 or 5 seats. And then instead of them now being just part of the game and still marginal in terms of their overall influence, be like, oh, they're a kingmaker. Oh, now they're the ones who are setting the stage for the election. And another thing that people don't talk about as much is that the media likes to feed their sources, meaning the people who leak to them are also people they'll want to help. So even if that particular TV station wants to help a specific camp or a specific party, you still have to report what goes on the other side and what happens in other parties. And they will go ahead and try to adapt the narrative or create a narrative that is helpful for their sources, because that will help them in their promotion, right? Because the political reporter wants to be a diplomatic reporter, wants to be promoted. The Knesset reporter wants to be a political reporter. They want to be promoted. So there's also that aspect. And again, I'm not being judgmental in any things I'm saying towards any of the people that I've said so far. In this entire interview, I'm just sort of unpacking what really happens behind the scenes and how things really work. and it might be taboo to go ahead and do so, right?
No, it's
But I really don't think that it's something that should be secret. And I'm sure, you know, you mentioned before the amount of views from my last interview. I'm sure that this type of content will generate a lot of interest from a lot of people who sort of who have a thirst to try to get a better understanding. And I think I'd say, even with everything I'm saying here, there are so many layers, you know, beneath that. But I'm trying to at least answer in a way that someone who's not within the game can at least grasp at something and give them a better understanding in terms of how the system works.
So, you know, when you used, I don't know how much you're using Chat or any other AI, Claude or Gemini. I hope you're using it a lot. I imagine you are, to some extent, at least. So, you know, at the bottom of every interview that you have with AI, it says, "We make mistakes." And so I think it would be a good exercise to put that at the bottom of all the newscasts. We make mistakes, and we're prejudiced towards a certain viewpoint, and like, watch out for that. Nobody's going to do it, but
No.
I'm waiting for someday when, I mean, it probably is not in the very distant future, where there's an AI news broadcast that is instructed to be balanced, authoritative, well-sourced. That will be remarkable.
It's always a question, right? That I get: is it possible to be neutral?
Right.
I think everyone has their own opinions.
Right.
I'm saying this as someone who's also, I've done, as you know, many positions that are not political within, you know, the
Right.
Knesset, right, where you're being asked to be a professional and to be, you know, more of a civil servant. And I think you have to just be aware of your own prejudice, your own opinions. In this particular term, it's been very useful as someone who did not vote for any party that's a member of the coalition or opposition, right? Voting for a party that didn't pass the threshold.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So if you're in a position where you're not invested, right, within one or the other, you're able to really be a lot more neutral. But that doesn't mean that you don't have opinions, right?
Right, and desires.
Yeah. Many times I'll say, you know, I'll tell the committee chairman or you know, whoever the person is, like, I'm going to do the work, but I want you to know that here are consequences that you didn't think about. And it's fine if you make the decision. Again, you're the decision maker, right? You can make the decision, but I want all the information to be in front of you, because you need to know what, in my opinion, this is going to cause. And I'm saying this as someone who's a veteran of the system and knows how it works, because a lot of times, specifically what's been happening with me more in the last number of terms, is you're working with rookie politicians, or at least rookie lawmakers. And many times it's my job to be that, you know, voice of reason to try to get through. And sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. But you have to be able to go ahead and do the job. And if you're not able to do the job, you can always go ahead and resign. You know, that's always something, or, you know, request a transfer, or whatever it is, that's always something that you can do. The committee that I worked in most of this past year, dealing with the ethics committee was very, very interesting, right? The idea of Knesset and ethics is weird, but just that committee, the committee that has 4 people, it's the smallest committee. It's the only committee that's not made by the parties, right? It's the only committee that has 2 coalition members, 2 opposition members. And they're the ones that look at the conflicts of interest. They're the ones that look at the declarations of wealth, right, and fortune. They're the ones that need to approve when someone wants to pay their trip to go overseas, if it's a minister, an MK. They're the ones who deal with all of the grievances that come up
It seems like a lot for 4 people.
So again, you can imagine those 4 people are the decision makers, right? But all of that stuff is being looked at and dealt with by people behind the scenes way before it gets to them. And in general, most of the work in Knesset or in politics or in government, I'm talking a lot about Knesset, but it's, I know government ministries also very well. It's the same climate. It's the same thing where also there, of course, you always have the friction between the political appointees versus, the professional, lifetime, people. So these are all, parameters that go into the formulation of, is this process going to work or not work? Who is, if you will, the czar that is working on this specific bill or issue in order to go ahead and accomplish what needs to accomplish? So I said the ethics committee is an interesting thing because of all that. The stuff that it's dealing with, it's sort of the behind the scenes, the dirty laundry. That's a very interesting, place. But there's just so many interesting places within the public sector that people are not aware of. I just want to go back one minute to the decision making, process again, where we're talking about neutrality. You can go ahead and say, look, I want you to give me a number of, options, a number of scenarios. Those are the best, if you will, bosses, right? I don't have a problem with someone if they hear me out and then still make the decision against me. Because I think there's value in hearing other opinions. Again, there are politicians, there are leaders that want to hear those opinions. And I can tell you that as a platoon commander, I took that, to be able to say, listen, I want to hear, I'm talking with my officers. I want to hear your opinions. And when you think I'm wrong, tell me why you think I'm wrong. But tell me why you think I'm wrong. And I challenge you to also give me an alternative. Because if I'm sitting there and I'm telling an elected leader that he's wrong, I know that I have to go ahead and I have the responsibility to go ahead and give him an alternative. Because it's very easy to say no. You have to say what the yes is. And to me, it's a kal v'chomer, right? When you're dealing with people's lives, when you're in the army,
all the more.
Right? Like, okay, you said I'm wrong. What should I be doing instead of that? So I think again, just like for the government or for military, I think the same thing goes into the private sector. I think when I look at companies that are very successful, they've built a culture where you can question and you can voice your opinion. And the people who work very concentrated, right? These big figure types that could know no wrong and are perfect. And all of the decision making, from the smallest decision, the biggest decision, is by them. Many times ask, like, why do you employ all these other people, right? So I think there's merit also in some of these things. Generally, I want to see great things come from the private sector into the public sector. I think here it's a unique situation where there are things in the public sector which could merit going into the private sector in certain areas where there are perhaps certain personalities or egos who have what to learn from it.
When you say private sector, like I'm thinking the big wigs, the Elon Musks and Bezos and Steve Jobs and those people, they did seem to have an autocratic, like a singular control over their whole business community, even if it has hundreds of thousands of people. And they were fairly merciless in culling their, their ideological progeny, to accommodate their ideals and their sense of purpose. But what they did do, without exception, is hire what I don't know what that means, but it's the best. They would hire the most, not necessarily most highly qualified in terms of their CV or their pedigree, but in terms of, I guess, their ability to do whatever job they were attempting to do, whether it involved creative ingenuity or simple persistence and application, or technical or strategic chores. But they still seem to be quite autocratic, and I think that's inevitable. I mean, like Moses.
I think again you have to differentiate between what's important and what's not important. Right. When you're the CEO, when you're the leader, when you're the visionary, you have to set the vision. You have to set the vision. You have to set the culture. You have to set the structure. Then you have to let the strategists be the strategists, and you have to let the tacticians be the tacticians. And I think the people you're talking about, a lot of them might even be considered ruthless. But I think you're specifically choosing people who are not going to sit in an interview and tell you how the programming works and how the mechanism works and how they chose their media campaign.
How they chose the what?
Their media campaign in terms of their commercial and why they went with this or that. Again, you're talking about the big stuff. The big stuff, and I think again that's the way it works. Usually, when you're talking about people who get to that level, those are people who get it. I was more referring, you're looking in the Israeli startup nature. You have different models, right? That's one of the nice things of the private sector. And you'll have people who might act like a general when they've never been a general. And you have people who come in as a general who then treat everyone like a general, like they're his soldiers, when it just doesn't work like that in the public sector. I think that's also why generals have generally been very lousy politicians. You can't treat people like that. It just doesn't work. It's the same way why I feel the reserve units are able to accomplish things that the regular units can't accomplish. My friends from Miluim, right, from my reserve unit, who've been with me, we've been at each other's weddings and simchas and whatever. Like that bond goes beyond whatever, sense of culture you're trying to build within the regular army when you have moving parts and you're jumping from unit to unit, right? I've been in the same battalion for 20 years.
Wow.
Right. In the regular army, the officer is jumping from unit to unit every number of years. It's just a completely different situation. The level of commitment that my soldiers have to me, it's a different level of commitment than when you're in your regular 3-year service. And I experienced this again during my regular service, when your officer is being switched every year, again, if you're looking at the various levels above you also, so it could be every number of months a different person within the chain of command is being replaced. And then you have to deal with whatever new decisions are being made and how it trickles down to you and how you have to implement it on the ground.
I wonder, I'm thinking of October 7th and all the layers of mismanagement or non-management or ideologically driven mistaken management, and thinking how much feedback they certainly received from below them.
For sure.
And ignored. And how, and at some levels, information and sense of mission was probably concealed from certain levels. That's what Bibi claims. That there were other vectors that he wasn't either fully aware of or that were hidden from him, or for whatever reason he wasn't able to deal with.
Yeah.
So yeah,
whatever. I have a lot to say on that.
You do,
but
yeah. But you don't want to say it.
I'm trying to think like what I can say, what I can't say, because, like I said, just as people who I might disagree with, and I watch their interviews, I'm sure that people disagree with with us and are listening to this interview. What I will say is, again, this is an opinion, right? This isn't a fact. This is an opinion which I'll say given on a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, if you're going to look at in terms of stuff that has been published, right? Herzl Levy, the chief of staff at the time, talked with his, two generals, that of intelligence, that of Southern Command. They obviously talked with their people, and again, you see the stuff that were coming up from the field that weren't going up. If I can, sense, and again, this is without knowing the exact. I think the problem was at the level of, the captains and the majors. And I think part of it was a culture that you had at the time that if you wanted to get promoted,
right.
The way the colonels and the generals were looking at it was they wanted to see clean records. As opposed to the Army that I remember, we were always checking ourselves. We were always, every small little thing, we were doing a tahkir. I'm trying to find the English word for that.
Like a
inquiry, right?
Yeah.
Like inquiry is maybe a big word for it, but like at least a check to understand at your own level, what you did right and what, and if you did stuff wrong and you admitted that, that was grounds for promotion, because again, the type of leader you wanted was one who was self-aware.
Right.
And the feeling I got was there seemed to be some sort of issue there. Again, I'm not saying widespread throughout the entire Army, but specifically within those areas. And at least from what I've seen, that's already been rectified. And that's why I feel comfortable, talking about that aspect. But again, it goes back to, and this is, again, to me, for sure, it's important to lead, it's important to learn, it's important to teach. So many jobs as an officer, but really, again, it's the decision making. And you're in the end, that's what you're going to end up being judged on, right? I got promoted because obviously I had good judgment in my decision making.
Right.
If I had poor decision making, I wouldn't get promoted.
So
That's the way it works. And I'm saying I think that for a little bit, that wasn't happening, at least in certain areas in the Southern Command. And again, this is an opinion. From what I've seen, at least, that's been rectified. And I'll note that various people who were in more senior leadership positions have either left, moved on, or whatever it is, but they're no longer in charge of making those decisions, right? Because, right, as a platoon commander, I have to decide who am I going to make, my company commanders, right? Above me, the decision to make me platoon commander, that's by the battalion commander, right? Above him, you have the brigade commander who has to choose, right? So you have each level choosing who's going to be the person who is going to be, in essence, implementing the orders underneath them. And there's an importance in having the best decision makers possible in those levels. And I would say if we're going to go, back to the political arena, that's also what you want, right? Ideally, you want that from your Knesset members, you want that from your committee chairman, you want that from your ministers, and obviously, ultimately, you want that from your prime minister, right? You want to have, within the committee, you want to have the best decision maker as the committee chairman. That's not always going to happen because of politics. Right?
Right.
So you have to at least hope that committee chairman is going to open up his ears and listen to those who have relevant experience or other opinions that might challenge him, that sometimes, again, he might not change 100% what he was going to do, but maybe he changes 20%, and it's the 20% needed to do something that is more, right, we're not bipartisan in Israel, so more multi-partisan or more nonpartisan.
Mm-hmm. So the problem, as I understand it, one of the problems, and I think is probably at the granular level, at the very lowest level, that when and this is a well-known thing, that when the girls who were the tatzpat, who were the observers, said, we observed stuff, and they were observing it for years and months and weeks and hours. And when they reported it, they were threatened, saying, like, if you don't drop this, you're going to be in trouble. And so what you're speaking about is the judgment of the people above looking down and being able to judge the lowers. And what should also happen is the lower down people being able to, with authority, judge the performance of their superiors, like the glass door thing that we have in mind.
I'll say two things on that. One, I agree with you. What you had there, that's, by the way, a classic example of basically what they were saying. In that case, I think they were also not just saying the captains and the majors, but even the lieutenants that were there with them. Right, the lower level were telling them not to. Again, I'm relying on public,
public information.
Right, we're telling them not to do anything that the stuff that they said went up the ladder and it was decided and whatever else. So you can see they themselves have given public criticism towards those level of people, and of course that's one piece of the puzzle. Right, it's a much bigger piece. If you're looking at the entire October 7th, but I'm saying that specific part is just one piece of the puzzle where you see that aspect where, they're trying to get something through and they're being told no.
Even, in other words, you're saying just their immediate superiors were putting a blanket over
which
it.
is even worse, right? But again, as someone who, right, like I hold the ranks of the very ranks that I'm criticizing here, and I'll say what I've done and what I know that other people like me have done, and this is something I think lesson from October 7th is to have that little box where even without putting your name, someone can write a note. It's not even something that he has to deal with the implications of it. And put it in there, and they know the platoon commander is going to go and pick it up and read it and do something with it. So you have to have that aspect where anyone can voice their opinion. And if you notice, I said also I tried to build my team in terms of my officers, in terms of my staff, in terms of people who I think will challenge with me and argue and. I did not want to choose yes men. I wanted to choose people who, of course, you inherit a lot of people, right? You don't get to choose everyone.
Right.
But when you come in, you sort of can shuffle the chairs on the deck. And you can sort of pivot people to certain positions. And I want to put people in positions where I think, they're going to do a good job, but also because I want to see what their perspective is on that task, and again, there's a thinking that I have behind that, as the decision maker in the platoon, right? And I've had many times where I've done something where I think is important. I've let, like I know my officer is making a bad decision. But I've let them make it. Like I've let them learn it for themselves. Just like as a father, sometimes you have to let your kids make the mistake by themselves. So you have to go ahead and do that. And just like with the kid, right, there are certain mistakes you don't let them, right? You don't let them put their hand in the fire. There are certain safety issues. It's the same thing with my officers. You have to have certain safety guidelines. You don't just let them make mistakes that have implications that are problematic, but I'll tell you this: I'm someone who I made a lot of mistakes, and I'm man enough to say that, and I have learned from it. I have learned probably more from my mistakes and my losses than from my triumphs and from my victories. And for sure, right? Everyone is going to pat themselves on their back and I can list the amount of medals and pins. I can list the amount of certificates and appreciation awards and different things. I'm talking obviously as well in terms of various positions I've had within my public, life there. But the truth is that you many times you learn more when you don't get something that you wanted. And I think many times you just have to trust Hashem that He's putting you on the path that you need to be put on. And it requires faith, right? And that's something as a Torah Jew I'm able to do, and that's easier for me to do. I sort of feel bad for people who don't have that.
Right.
Because when you don't believe in that higher power, and you don't believe that there is a meaning in terms of what you go through, why you go through it, that everything is just circumstantial and there is no significance, I find that type of existence very empty.
It's strange in the sense that, let's see if I can get it into words. If you know what the scientists say about 80-20, they say 80% of the world is dark matter, 80% of the DNA is junk DNA. So 80% is hidden. Now, in a world where 80% of reality is hidden, and yet things seem to go in an orderly way, more or less. Like we wake up and the world is still consistent in some, and the human world has some continuity. To think that we're in touch, let's say, or that to think that there's no organizing principles or organizing intelligences of the 80%, that it's just random chaotic mess, and yet the world doesn't fly apart, at every moment, or cease to make sense completely. Is that seems like a bigger leap to me than saying, yeah, obviously, that 80% of hiddenness has significantly more intelligence than the 20% that's revealed. So that just seems like a logical conclusion.
Yeah,
So.
I think also, right, like when you see the chaos that is life, that is society, whatever is there outside, for some people maybe that's their mechanism, right, to be like, there is no formula, there is no, that's their out. But yeah, I know it seems to certain people, surreal or whatever, but I think there is a right decision, there's a wrong decision, there's good, there's evil. I'm very much, of course, right, you work in Knesset, I very much believe in the gray, but certain cases are just black and white, and there has to be some sort of value-based understanding of what that is. And if, I'll go back to a moment, being an officer, right, when you're in the chaos, when you're in the crisis, that's when you're measured. I thrive when there's a crisis, right? Always, considered by others. I look at other interviews I've done, right? You're so cool, calm, collected. Yeah, even in a crisis, I know how to do that. Believe me, I can scream. I can get red in the face. I can, if I need to, but that's just a tool. To have the self-awareness, to know who you are, to have the self-restraint, to pull yourself back when you need to, but also to let yourself fly when you need to, because sometimes you need to do that. Sometimes you have to bang on the table, and you have to get red in the face so the other person understands that you're serious, right? So when I'm doing that's control. That doesn't mean that I'm
out of control,
right? That I'm out of power. It's that you have to be calculated when you're doing those things, and in general they say, right, officers are animals of chaos and whatever it is, but I think
What do
also
you-
when you're
go ahead.
going to back to Knesset, right? You're looking for people who, right? You're looking for people to lead you. You're looking for people to make decisions for you, because you want to go about your day, right? It doesn't matter if you have a 9 to 5 job or you have some other job or whatever it is. You want to know, I voted for these people. These people are out there doing the job that I want them to be doing, and I trust the decisions they're making. And many times when you're looking to campaigning, you're looking to the campaigning where parties are basically going against other parties, saying there's a problem with the decision making there, with that guy, with those people. And it hits home for a lot of voters, because in essence that's what they're doing, right? They're choosing 120 people to represent them to make all of those decisions. And that becomes really the expectation that they follow through. And if someone follows through on those decisions, they'll continue to get that vote. And if they don't, then someone is going to look to put his vote somewhere else.
Yeah, I wonder how much that's accurate. That people, like, because politicians are famously well known for not keeping their promises.
That's very true.
Yeah,
Right,
and
it's an oxymoron. But yeah,
yeah. But if they maintain continuity, loyalty, devotion to their community, whatever that community is,
right, the
with
tribalism.
the tribal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the nature of. I think that's the nature of reality, is that it is tribal, it is community based, it's the language of the community, it's the ideals of the community, which, just like we talk about God as being a living God, that is also evolving. You want a community that's not stuck in its ideologies.
You know, so I'll say on that, right? I'll speak to that. I feel that is definitely Israel's history. I feel that we're emerging out of that. More and more you find Haredim who are not voting for the ultra-Orthodox parties, right? More and more you'll find religious Zionists that are voting for a spectrum of parties across the spectrum. You know, more and more you'll have people who are Sephardim who are not going to vote for Shas or Likud, right? More and more you'll have people like we mentioned Einat Vilf before, right? A former Labor MK who changes their opinions, you know, dramatically.
Changes their stripes completely.
So I'm saying, and again, we're talking about, you know, post October 7th, a lot of people have changed. So a lot of that is changing. So I agree with you that that's Israel's history, right? Israel's history is very much oriented in the fact of, I'm going to vote with my village votes like this, I'm going to vote like this. And very, very small amount of people would dare, you know, vote against what the tribe wanted from them. And for them, right, you have the secret ballot, right, for those small percentage, because if not, you could just check the census and know how to distribute the seats. I think it's different. I think today it's a very different Israel. I don't know if you had a time also to read any of my pieces on the vision that I set forth for a Jewish, democratic, and secure Israel.
Yeah.
But I wrote all these things before October 7th, but I feel that aspect of security, and security, unlike democracy or Judaism, is something that you can actually, ironically, right, you can actually define that a lot easier, right? Judaism, you can say, are we talking about the nationality? Are we talking about the religion? Are we talking about as a cultural phenomenon? Are we talking about the historical civilization? Are we talking about the ethnic base, right? Democracy, are we talking about, you know, Athens base, direct democracy? Are we talking about, you know, there's so many different, you know, more of a liberal democracy, more of a, you know, some of the Eastern European type democracies that we see today. When it comes to security, it's pretty simple. You know, when you're at home, you know, are you locking your door each time you return from your house? Are you doing that before you go to sleep, or do you live in a place where you keep your door open all the time, right? The sense of a person's personal security, sense of person's feeling in terms of their national security, it just comes down to really the simple feeling of, do I feel secure or do I not feel secure? And I think for a lot of us, when you're looking October 7th, you're saying, wow, the idea of Israel's existence, which we thought, was a given, is no longer a given. And I think that made a lot of people go ahead and do, cheshbon nefesh in terms of what that means for themselves and their opinions. It was very interesting for me, right, jumping back and forth, roughly, again, spending, half the time here, half the time there, but seeing the people in the army doing that, but also seeing the politicians doing that, seeing the politicians blaming the army, seeing the army blame the politicians. In my opinion, right, both sides have a share in that blame. And, this one has more, this one has less. Again, the media follows that. That's yellow. That's interesting. It influences also the horse race politically, right? Who's going to be prime minister? Who's going to be in the coalition? Who's going to get whose and whose votes? But it also influences in terms of the military, right? Who's getting the promotion? Who's not getting the promotion? What was this person saying before the 7th? What did he do on the 7th? How did he act on the 7th? What did he do after the 7th? So all of those also became, parameters. And we have to say, right, there's a certain level of politics, right, even within the appointing process, because ultimately you need the prime minister to appoint the IDF chief of staff. That's a political appointment, right? Every major general, every aloof needs to be approved, signed by the defense minister. That's a political appointment.
Are there a lot that are refused?
So, before the war, it would be very rare that there would be disagreements. And many times also you would have a defense minister who he himself might have been a former chief of staff. And the chief of staff that he would have could have been a previous deputy, or anyway, someone that they came up together and served together and more or less saw things the same. Post-October 7th, we ended up in a different reality. So you've had a lot more friction there, and some of that stuff has gone into the public sphere, which is why I also feel, comfortable enough to open that can of worms. And I think that's interesting. I think that's interesting when, and again, I'm not going into whether this decision was a good one or this one wasn't a good one, but you have now this other, notion where, okay, this person doesn't get promoted, now he goes to politics, right?
That's interesting.
So that also becomes very interesting. And really, right, there's always this discussion within the army. In the regular army, you can't have politics. But in the reserves, how do you deal with that, right? Because you have people who go on to be candidates. You had, since it's merged and it's no longer running independently, but you had an entire party that was, considered itself the party of reservists, right, led by reservists and whatever else. How do you deal with that, right? Do you go ahead and kick everyone out? Do you keep them? Do you try to just freeze them for the time period of the election and then let them go back? What do you do? How different are they from people who don't overtly go ahead and say, I'm politically active in one party or another, or even stand as a candidate or not, but are the most political, animals possible, right? And they act very politically, and everyone knows what their views are, and everyone knows who they're voting for, but they know the regulations and they'll be able to continue most likely in their positions without, having to be put through these checks and balances.
Are there instances during the war, I don't know if they're any public or not, where people's political position became an issue, either to the right or the left? People refrained from taking action or engaged in action?
I've not encountered,
No.
I've not encountered that. I obviously can't speak to the whole army.
Yeah, right.
I look towards what happened before, though, October 7th, right? With the people saying we're going to not serve. We're going to refuse orders. I mean, we know now from, stuff that, has been taken that went into the consideration. Obviously, it's a political issue, how much gravity you're going to give that, how much, percentage you're going to give that, but that was at least a contributing factor, right? We just know that's factual in terms of documents into the decisions of the timing that went into October 7th. But, I can say for myself, right, like I know one guy, great guy, who he never told the unit, but I know publicly he went out and he said, I'm not going to serve, I'm not going to whatever. October 7th, he showed up like everyone else, Like, that's another thing that I'll say, right, our enemies always underestimate our resolve because they have where to run to, we don't. So we will always fight to the end because we have no other choice.
Right.
And I think, by the way, that's something that a lot of our friends also don't fully understand, that there are other, perhaps not as amazing solutions or alternatives, but the truth is, again, in 48 and 67, when Arabs chose to run, had to run, however you want to look at what happened there, they had where to go to. We didn't. And that really is, I think, why we won those wars. And going back, to the question at hand, I feel that, that there are people who are like, you should not have welcomed those people back, the ones who said they wouldn't serve.
Oh, wow.
That
would have been
and I'm kind of like,
that's not a good idea.
Right. To me, that's political.
Yeah,
right?
that's a very bad idea.
So again, it just, even things that to me or to you, or to one person listening to this might not view as political. So to other people outside of this studio, and a different listener or viewer of this is going to go ahead and come to a completely different conclusion, right? I'll go ahead, right, and I'll give my weekly Dvar Torah to the platoon.
Oh, really?
Right, and I view it not really in a religious sense. I view it in terms of cultural, Zionistic,
wisdom,
nationality.
cultural wisdom.
Right,
Yeah.
I could also choose to quote Churchill, or I could quote John Quincy Adams, or I could Washington. Like there are many, or Lincoln. There are plenty of people I can go ahead and quote. But I just feel specifically to the Israeli experience, it makes sense to use the Israeli quotes from the Israeli scripture. We're, after all, known as, the people of the book. If you go back to Ben Gurion and, really throughout the ages, I'll even say, in recent generations, right? I remember one conversation from maybe 17 years ago. I'm sitting with Don Meridor, right? Definitely considered the most, leftist in the spectrum of the Likud ministers at the time. After that, he would, of course, leave the Likud. And we're discussing whatever issues, and he's quoting to me verses of the Bible, right, of the Tanakh. And you just have amazing, right, the old school people, and even the second generation after them, have and had a very big appreciation really, you look at anything Ben Gurion does, he was very much connected to that book. And, I'll look at different bases where I served, right, where there's this element, everyone needs to show up Friday night for Kiddush, right? For the blessing of the wine is done. And you'll have, officers calling up secular soldiers that are not there to make them come. Now it's obvious, again, this isn't religion coming into the army, right? This is
Culture of the place.
a cultural thing, right? Because for those who don't know, that's the desecration of the Sabbath, right? Of the rule to call someone for something that is not, of course, mission-oriented, right? So again, I feel there are people who they're like, it's not even biblical criticism, right? They want to move away from the Bible, right? And then they'll say, "Oh, there's religion in the army. Why are they forcing me to go to Kiddush on Friday night? Why is the email of the army every week? I'm getting a Devar Torah from whatever rabbi is for my brigade or for my command or whatever it is." So I'm saying even things that would seem to me or to you to not be political, they themselves have also been considered political by other people.
For sure. It's interesting, when I was first came to Israel, like, let's say in the early 80s, there were people, and there's still people around before they've gone to the army, who had no exposure to Yiddishkeit, to Judaism, and they're Jewish, and they've never heard Kiddush, they've never heard the Friday night blessing over the wine, and these are like well-educated, cosmopolitan people. At least it was that way. Now I think it's changed. I think everybody's clued in a little bit more. So what I want to ask is, always reaching for the stars. We win because we don't have a place to go. Now, the problem is we're fighting against a community, a culture that finds victory in defeat, and so how do you, my father used to tell a joke that a sadist and a masochist met, and the sadist, the masochist said, "Hurt me," and the sadist said, "No." So if their victory is defeat, then we could just not harm them. But that's unfortunately, their program also includes the destruction of, it's not just that they relish defeat and death, but they also require the destruction of everybody who's not like them. So that's a bit of a problem. So,
you have to be strong. You have to not be weak. You have to not give up. You have to be resilient. You have to show perseverance. And you have to win. You have to not be afraid to win.
And I think if we replace Donald Trump with AI and give it some basic operating principles like Western culture must survive, I think we'll be okay. So
look, I think Trump, right, he's looking at his position as a global leader. He's looking at the global economy, right? He's looking at the responsibility of really the whole free society, right, that is on his shoulders, with the fact that he also has midterms. Okay,
that's for sure.
And at least to me, I feel that's a legitimate political situation for someone to try to balance between the two, even if, again, me personally or our country specifically are getting the shorthand of that. I think, first of all, it's important to understand it's not personal. It's not something that is value-based, turnaround or whatever it is. It's the type of strategic decision you make that is tough. I'll I'll give you an example, right, of another military one. Ariel Sharon was, we'll put politics on the side. He was a brilliant strategist as a general. In 73, with the Egyptians, where he had two forces, and there was one force that was hammered and was getting killed, and he had a second one that was advancing and going very deep into Egyptian territory and doing a great job. And he had this third force, and he had to decide what to do with it. And he sent them to back up the ones who were winning instead of those who were losing. And again, that might sound like a horrendous decision. Strategy-wise, that helped us, keep the Sinai, win in the end of can't say we won the war, but not lose the war, win, again, territory on the other side, force, the Sinai one, Kissinger deal, all the stuff that we were able to, in essence, get or maintain, or everything that happened was because of that strategic decision. And other generals during that war who were dealing with that same issue went ahead and used their backup to help the ones who were losing. And that led with additional lives being lost.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
I'm saying here, if I'm going to make the analogy here, the feeling that a lot of people get in Israel is that he's, putting his chips somewhere else. And we have to realize a couple things here. One, that means that it's very possible that either he or those around him are interpreting us as losing, and then we have to do what we can to project winning and victory. And if that means going ahead and doing certain things that might be considered more aggressive, to consider that in order to be viewed as winners again. And again, we see in Trump's rhetoric when, that's something that's relevant. But on the second hand, you can look at, great tacticians within that war of the officers and, the squads that were able to survive in the grouping that Sharon did not back up were those who learned how to show resilience and persevere. And even though they were outnumbered, and even though they were stuck in the trenches, and even though they were losing, they were able to maintain their ground. And when we got to the resolution, which we got to, the ones who were cornered were the Egyptians. And then there was a whole situation of Kissinger trying to pull them out, not pull them out, right? You sort of had that situation in this war, right, where you had the ceasefire and then you had the terrorists in the Rafah tunnels, right? They were on the wrong side of the yellow line.
What happened to all those? There were like 100 that were trapped after the ceasefire? They kind of disappeared from the media.
I'm just saying that, in the end you end up in those type of situations. I remember, the weeks afterwards, we'd always hear another 2 went out and were killed, another this, that, whatever.
They wanted to give them safe passage.
Yeah,
like these murderers.
It's crazy,
oh, yeah,
right? No, because I'm saying Kissinger in 73 did give, the unsafe passage to the Egyptians that survived, right? They ended up going back.
But that was after they had...
that was after the signed agreement, of course.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm saying they tried to, again, whatever agreement, was signed, wasn't signed, in terms of the previous Gaza hostage release, right? I think it's very far from Sinai 1. By the way, I think Sinai 2 was a much, more interesting, just from the diplomatic perspective, but also from security. The Sinai 2 was more interesting than Sinai 1. But I feel like, again, I'm getting into a little bit of more of an academic debate that I doubt a lot of the people here, other than perhaps some of my former classmates.
So let me try to be real for a moment, not theoretical, although it's still theoretical. It seems to me, and to people I've listened to, that that there's not really much of a choice but to use overwhelming force to depose and destroy the Iranian regime. And what you mentioned about the November situation with the midterm, that it could well result in his and his party's losing power and his being indicted and for all sorts of things. But if he does it, so it might entail something that is kind of against his nature, his usual nature, which is real self-sacrifice, right?
Look again, when we're looking at Trump's, interest, and that's something that you should go ahead and analyze. Like everyone has their own idea.
Yeah.
Okay. My idea is there's always going to be the next political, right? Politics is part of your interest. It's not your only interest.
Right.
His current political interest is definitely the midterms, but afterwards it's going to be the Republican primary to make sure that whoever he decides in the end is his handpicked successor is going to succeed him. And then it's going to be the general election of, making sure the guy that he picked, who, again, assuming wins the primary, goes on to win the general election so that he can sort of cement his legacy. So I think there's always going to be a political motive there within his interest. I think that's always going to be something. Obviously, timing is part of it, right? We're at this point closer to the primary, but we're still also far enough that if you can do something that you can wrap up and end before you vote, it's okay. But again, you have to look at the fact, right?
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
In other words, if there were an actual victory, but of course
But you have to be able to ensure the victory, right? Like, sometimes you don't know, right? Like, how bad is it when you're sitting, you're in the Situation Room, and your best advisors, chief of staff, everyone, they're like 50-50. Do you take it? Are you a gambling man? Right? And then if it's 40-60, do you take it? If it's 60-40, do you take it? Like there's a lot of things here also where, and of course, this is also assuming you agree with their decision-making process of how they formulated how much percentage they put into the probability to each, different, factor. Because I think it's important for people to understand, right? There are complex, right? This is the fun stuff, right? You learn in the masters, but there are complex ways to come up with these numbers. These probabilities are not, abstract. There's a number of parameters that go into these probabilities. So there's a lot there. So again, the political is always going to be there, but I think Netanyahu's the same way, by the way, right? He's, for a long time, the thought process was that he wanted elections last month in June, right? We're in July of 2026. So he wanted elections in June. And he was going to bring Trump in May, and there was this whole, thing. But as he got closer, he saw that he was not going to be able to bring that victory immediately. And I think that's a big reason why we're heading towards having elections on time. The last time Israel had elections on time was after the 1984 to 1988 term.
Wow.
And what makes it even more interesting was specifically that term was a rotation agreement between, Peres and Shamir. So you're basically in a situation where this is the first time in, I don't know, maybe, as far back as either Levi Eshkol or Ben Gurion, where you're having a full term with one single prime minister. That's just something that doesn't happen. But it's also because he's waiting for that victory. I think a lot of Israelis, if they see a victory, will be persuaded by that victory to go ahead and entrust, their vote there, even whatever they might feel his level of guilt is for October 7th.
Let's talk about Trump for another moment. Do you Do you doubt that America, let's say together with Israel, could effectively destroy the Iranian regime and thereby send a strong message to Islamic jihadists worldwide? If politics were no, I mean, if
Look, it's always right. It's a question of time and resources.
Mm-hmm.
If you're willing to devote the time and resources,
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think that Iran can be defeated. That's my opinion. That's where I'm coming from. You have to be able to devote the time and resources to do that.
Mm-hmm.
When we mentioned the timetable, right, of the November election, I don't know. I don't know if that is something that you can do within that time frame. It's possible you can.
Between now?
I'm saying we're in July,
yeah.
and if you're looking at the timeline to November, and you're asking me the question, not can you defeat Iran, can you topple the regime, whatever the end goal.
Yeah, that's a
there,
major
which
question also.
Which is there, and I'm putting that to the side, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You're asking me, can you do that before that? So again, it's a question if you can do that. And again, I'm humble enough to say, as much as I think I might know, there is a lot that I don't know. And in order to give a finite, answer to that type of a question, mm-hmm. you really have to be at that level of prime minister or defense minister or mm-hmm. someone who has sat in those positions mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. where you know enough to be able to come to those conclusions, right? Like many times I might not be in a position anymore. I might have done that position 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, that might be. But because I've held that position, I know what I would think if I was back in that position, mm-hmm. and I can sort of formulate, knowing the other players that be, what mm-hmm. other people would think given what I know about them. And you can sort of more or less come up with various options that could come out of that decision-making process. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying here, when you're talking about something with the issue of time, right? Time is the one resource you can ever get back. I cannot make that determination mm-hmm. Simply.
So let's jump for a closing to we spoke about the Bible. Let's speak about the prophets. What do the prophets say? You see these YouTubes about end of time, it's everybody's, the guy, classic image of the guy holding the placard. It's the end of the world. And so some people say that there are prophecies about a war with Iran, with flaming snakes or something in the sky. And do you know anything? Is that something that you keep in your mind or that you're aware of?
Wow.
Sorry to...
No, it's fine. I guess I always keep in mind Malachi chapter 3, right? Perek Gimel. Mm-hmm. Mostly because, or Malachi for those not Jewish listening, right? For us, he's the last prophet. Mm-hmm. And his last prophecies carry a lot of weight. And when he's talking about the end of times and all of that stuff, and Eliyahu Hanavi, right? That's where it is. Mm-hmm. In our scripture, that's the source. That's not something that's out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. That's something that's written in the Tanakh. So I'm thinking about Malachi Shalosh, mm-hmm. right, Perek Gimel, but I'm also thinking...
Well, what does it say? Here, go ahead and quote it or paraphrase it.
To paraphrase it, right, and again, it's tough to do it because it's also like, how are you going to translate it to...
Or just to whatever, you have something in mind. You can pull it up.
You have the thing of, Levavot al Banim and Banim, it's like
hearts of the children to the heart.
So I'm saying, right, it's like how do you, because different interpretations of how you're going to look at that is it a good thing, is it a bad thing, Why is it that you go back afterwards to talk about the coming of Eliyahu Navi? You know, in the pasuk after, then it must be a bad thing. But basically, we're talking about a time where it would seem, at least, right, that you know, it's talking about returning the hearts of, you know, of. I mean, that's again one interpretation, but basically, you're talking about a time where
Malachi Shalosh.
throughout history, right? Generally, you've looked towards the older people, right? The elders, they're the people with all of the knowledge. And Malachi's talking about a time where it would seem where it's the younger people, right? It's the high tech, it's the AI, you know, people, the cyber, it's the younger people who are the wise men, if you will. And again, how you want to go ahead and interpret those last verses. Do you go ahead and look at it as, you know, that God is going to try to bring the old people back to the young people back to the old people? Like, what exactly is he talking about? My personal interpretation is that he's looking to sort of create unity between some sort of divide, which again, you can read the words and like I said, you have many different interpretations of how to interpret
I'm just
those
interested
words.
in your,
But I'm
if you
saying
have a
for
gestalt, if you
me,
have a
I
point of view.
think
Yeah.
he's looking to do the active process of uniting us, right? Uniting us because we are very much divided. And the last time we were here, I talked a lot about unity because, right, like one of the things that I always ask myself, right, Hashem has given me the merit to be in this place, to have the skill set that I have, to have gone through the experience, to have the connections that I possess, to be able to move about in the system in the way that I do with my abilities. And you have to ask, right, what's my role? What's my tafkid? And I look here towards, again, my interpretation of his attempt to bring unity between us as what I can do to go ahead and bring that about. And that's why I strive towards unity within my platoon. I strive towards unity in terms of coming to as much of a consensus as I can when I'm talking to the various people, elected lawmakers from different, parties within a committee or between different government ministries to try to come to that unity. So I'm thinking about that aspect because I'm also aware that's my interpretation and that there are other people that are taking it in like you said, a doomsday, Armageddon type, thing, right? We're only going to have Mashiach. We're only going to have Eliyahu Navi after, there's fire and brimstone. That's a view that I just don't get behind. I feel that we can get to where we need to get to as a Jewish people without destruction. Of course, October 7th was a reminder that we always do come together when we are, in that risk of extinction. And I really, again, I'll go back to the fact where I think that's what we were at. There are people who still, they argue that point that it wasn't that bad, but I really think that
wasn't
it was.
that bad? October 7th?
Yeah. I'm hearing a lot of these revisionist, stuff or whatever.
Where in America?
No, I'm hearing also here in Israel.
In Israel?
Yeah. They're saying Lebanon was never going to attack. So if they wouldn't have stopped them there, they would have stopped them in Beersheba. They would have stopped them like in the second line or the third line. Like they wouldn't have made it to Tel Aviv or whatever else. I've heard people with these opinions. But remember, one of the situations, right, when you're working in Parliament, is you hear all of the opinions, even the most extreme opinions. generally, you'll also see the media or a lot of people going because of the shock factor and the click, bait and ratings and, whatever it is that people need for the pay ads, whatever. So they're going to give, because a lot of these things are outrageous, they'll give this stuff play. And then you'll see podcasts where people will say these things and they'll get, crazy amount of hits. So that's something that's, scary. But I also remember, Yirmiyahu Lamed Bet, right? I also think of Jeremiah 32, where you have this optimistic picture, right? You're at a time where Yirmiyahu is in jail, in essence for telling the king, right? The last king of Judea, that, we're going to be conquered. You're at a point where they're at the walls of Jerusalem. They've conquered all of Judea except for the capital. And his cousin, who lived in nearby Anatot, right, which is near
10 miles from here.
Right, near the Pisgat Zev neighborhood of Jerusalem today, right? So he goes, and he's able to escape into the Jerusalem walls, as part of the retreat before they came. And he goes to see his cousin in jail. And he offers to sell his field in Anatot, which is now the Babylonians have taken possession of. He offers to sell it to Jeremiah. And the night before, Hashem comes to Yirmiyahu and he tells him, your cousin is going to come and he's going to offer and you're going to buy it. Even though the Babylonians owned the land now, you're going to buy it. And he buys it, and Hashem explains the reason of why he buys it. And this is also what Yirmiyahu goes ahead and prophesies. And I think this is really the words that probably kept those living in Yerushalayim going during those days. Right? And right now we're talking during those 3 weeks of between the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av.
Right.
So it's quite remarkable that we're talking
the months
about that.
We're talking about the Hebrew months.
The Hebrew months
in.
of the year, the time of the first of the destruction of the first temple. So he said. So the message, why is he buying this? Because the line is Od yiknu sadim v'kramim ba'aretz hazot. Right now it might seem bad, but the day will come where you will go ahead and you will buy the fields and the vineyards and you will be able to take full possession of this land again. And that's just like a remarkable message there, right? That when everything looks dark, that there is light. So even when I see something which might take me to the point where you're saying, right, of, wow, this is the end of days or this, whatever, I think, you know what, there is that message, right? That's the prophet that also I happen to have his name, right? Jeremy. That there is hope. And I really think as someone who's been able to maintain optimism after all these years behind the scenes, working in Knesset, in government, in the public sector, I really feel hope is this one thing that if we're able to hold on to that, the hope, our faith.
But it's not a proximate hope. It's not like next day or tomorrow or even a week or a month necessarily.
Well, we've talked, there's vision, there's strategy, and there's tactics.
Oh, great. I like this.
Right. And I'm talking for a minute now, right, when you're talking about prophecies, the prophecies, right, another word for them are visions. I'm looking towards that vision. I'm looking towards that vision of, just like Yirmiyahu was talking about, going back to Anatot. By the way, I have even some soldiers that today live in the settlement of Anatot, right? It's not in where historical Anatot is, right? But it's nearby. So we've gone back to Anatot. So look back at that vision of, in the end, there's a plan. In the end, it's going to be good. But then to go to the fact of understanding we need to go about strategies that will allow us to achieve that vision and not leave it to Hashem, right? There's no place where Hashem says, leave it to me. The Tanakh is a story of times where he's asking man to rise up to the occasion and to do what it is that's right, what it is that he's asked. And the prophecies, those are visions. The strategy, that's with the leader, right? That's with Moses, Joshua, the judges, the prophets, right? Those are the heroes within the stories, within the Tanakh, the people who went ahead and did what it was that Hashem envisioned, right? So they were in essence many times the strategist that helped achieve that divine vision. But no less important is the tactics. And for the tactics to work, you have to be able to give room for the tacticians to do what it is that they do right. And many times you would see that, right? If you're talking about Yirmiyahu, he had by him Baruch ben Neriah, right? His scribe, you know. Moshe Rabbeinu, right? The greatest of all prophets. Yeah, he had Yoshua, he had Joshua, but he also had Aaron, he had Miriam, like he had Hur, you know, there were all of these, you know, other people around him. So that's also a message that the leader, number one, is very important, but no less important are the people that are there around him. It's something of importance to be able to make sure you choose the right people for those positions. And I think, by the way, it's very telling when you're looking at a situation and you see how the decision making happens, right? And not only the actual decision in the end. Is that a decision-making process that makes sense? Is that a decision-making process that seems to be a complete mess, where there are people who seem to have outside interests that might not be pure? So those are also things that I think
but there is a thing, Hashem elechem lechem, God will fight on your behalf. There is.
He will.
Yeah.
And he does.
Yeah.
He does. Anyone who looks at the last, 1,000 days, he does. He is there with us. But the point is that there's expectation that we go and that we be part of it. Right. I remember last time we talked about a situation, right, with Gidon, where he wants to bring down the number of soldiers. Right,
to 30,000 years.
He wants to lower the number.
Then lower the number of combatants. So
I'm saying, are you lapping the water? Are you not lapping the water? He's looking for certain characteristics, right? So certain times that is what's asked for us. But there was never a time where Hashem says, you know what, I got it from you. let me take care of it, right? It's not a situation like that. Generally, when Hashem is working alone, right, you have the Mabul, right, you have the flood during Noah's time. You have the destruction of Sodom and Amorah, right? Like when Hashem is acting alone, you have the 10 plagues. When Hashem is acting alone, it is generally him coming down with all of his might. And boy, he does stuff that, only Hashem can do. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to when he's asking us to be active and to do something, right? He asks us to cross the Red Sea. Afterwards, he brings it down on the Egyptians. But had we chosen not to go,
right,
he would not have brought the water down.
Right.
We had to take that first step, and if you take it to leadership, Nachshon ben Aminadav, who makes that first leap, that's the type of leadership, right? Of someone who goes ahead and says, That's a real Nasevani
Ad
Shema,
nefesh, yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's someone who says, I'm going to do, but I believe that Hashem is behind me. But I'm going to do. I'm not going to stay here and wait for the Egyptians to kill me, right? But I'm going to go ahead and do something that would seem to be a huge leap of faith, but I'm going to do because that's my that's expectation upon me from Hashem.
Right. So we can hope that Trump will, or Netanyahu or somebody will take that ad nafesh, that risking his own ego and persona for the sake of Western civilization and God or whatever. I mean, I'll just say Western, not to be presumptuous.
Yeah, look, I said, I think that it's hard, right? Because most times we're emotional, we're impulsive, and we jump to conclusions. It's important to look at these things, calculating, and to be strategic. And I really do think it's possible to change that relationship for the better. And in terms of how to do that, I think I laid out a little bit, beforehand. But in terms of the who question, right? It's we can talk about the election. I know we're towards the end or whatever, or next time. I can always come back, as I've said. But in the interest of now, because again, the elections are still over 100 days away, right? We're over 3 months from the election. You need decision making today. You need to be in a position where the decisions being made today and tomorrow and next week and next month are good. And for sure, it's a political question. Who's the best to be able to do that from the election forward? As hard as it might be, even for opponents, we have to take measure in what we say to make sure that we don't harm ourselves in doing so. And I will say, I think until now, a majority of the voices that I've heard in terms of those running to replace Netanyahu, I think have been able to do a good job of that line of, on one side, articulating a future that things could be better, but not saying things that are stupid that could mess us up or be used as fuel between the two current leaders, because that's not something that's going to help us. And we should also remember that whatever does happen in the next term, we also have to look towards the fact that, assuming it'll be another full term or close to that, we're also going to have an American presidential election, and a changing of a president, whether it's going to be a continuation of the Republican Party or a Democrat. So in terms of what's happening today, that's very important. When you're also looking towards the election, the question of who's best positioned in terms of the various, options of what's going to be for that Israeli term, that's going to be on basically both sides of the end of this term and the beginning of next term. That's also, I think, an indication. But again, we can get into that another time.
Let's do it. Maybe we'll call up some people from America, and you'll come in and you'll be a co-interviewer.
I like, doing panels. I like doing co-stuff. I'm going to be doing pretty soon. Obviously, not the sort of thing that's going to be, posted online and stuff. But I'm going to do a Senate, bipartisan Senate briefing soon with a panelist, with someone who's who I know, another, person who I tend to disagree with on certain issues and agree on other issues. And those always make for good conversations to see those type of things work. I remember back in the day, right, there was Hannity and Combs, right, when they were like going at each other. And that was always interesting to see two people from different perspectives go at each other. In Israel, it's more difficult, right? When you get 10 or 12 different parties, so that makes for a much more messy election panel or podcast.
But it's better in this. I mean, like now with the fragmentation of the parties in America, there's I can't imagine what's going to become. The Democrats are against the Republicans, and the Republicans are against the Republicans, and
Again, like I said, I feel like that's a whole big can of worms, which I'm happy to jump into. I'll just say there are a lot of questions that need answers, and there are a lot of issues that I think that can be raised in these type of formats, in which you're able to go ahead and break it down in a way where you can really have a very interesting debate that people really benefit from. Yeah, again, you look at all of these formats in the States of all these types of formats. They're doing so well, because I think there really is such a thirst for it, and it goes back to a previous point I didn't make that I was thinking of making, right? Because everything is a choice, but I'll make it here. Many times in today's climate, with social media, with AI, with all these alternative formats, the role and the influence that mainstream media plays is less. We see this a lot more in the United States. Mm-hmm. We're starting to see this here. Mm-hmm. And I think that trajectory will continue, because that trend is something that seems to be global. So yeah, a person who's about to go do their dishes, or about to go do, some handiwork within the house, and is not looking for the flashy mainstream, is looking to go ahead and listen to something for an hour or even 2 hours. They're looking for something like this, which will be interesting for them and pull them in, and is intellectually honest, right? That isn't about the clickbait and the ratings and all the stuff that I said, because I think we've sort of gotten to this point, right, within all of the materialism and commercializing and sensation and whatever, that people are looking for something that's genuine and real, right? Specifically with the push to AI, it's also pushing a lot of people to feel that human touch, and to feel something that's real and not manufactured. And once you dive in a little bit into AI, you see how much the mainstream is using AI, and they're more or less one and the same. And then you look for something that's outside of the algorithm. And I think our last interview got as many hits as it did because it was out of the algorithm. And this is also out of the algorithm. So I hope, again, it'll do as well, because I think this was an interesting conversation. It's always a pleasure to come down and speak with you.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Let me turn it off. My pleasure. We'll do it again soon.
Sounds good.
Okay.
How fast do you think you'll be able to get this one